guys, welcome back to another video on the channel today. Today we're going to be looking at some very basic tips for creating a low downforce setup, and I'm going to go through these tips with you guys after we've gone through this run. As you can see now on screen now, we're driving the Porsche 911 Cup. There's not many things you can change with this setup, so it's quite a good car just to give you very basic tips that you can do. And it's also a car that is very tricky to run on low downforce, so it's quite a good car to get a base setup in terms of low downforce for this car, for this video. And while I give you some tips for this video, I managed to get this car running on 0.3. You could probably run it less downforce, but remember, I'm going to give you some tips now about when you're creating your setups, things to do for creating a lower downforce setup, stuff to be careful with. For example, you don't want to always create a setup that is always the minimum downforce, because every track still has corners. Monza is probably one of the tracks where you're going to go as low as you pretty much can, apart from I always like to keep, especially with a car like this where it struggles on traction a little bit, I would run slightly a couple of clicks on the rear wing. Like I say, I'm using 3 for this video, but one thing you need to be aware of, there's other tracks, you don't always want to go to the lowest setting, because you still want to maintain corner grip through the corners. Even at Monza, you've got the 2 Lesmos, the final corner where you really need to carry a lot of speed through that final corner and create grip. So there's always compromises you need to make within a setup. And you can see now we've got this setup running really nicely. I wanted to do quite a long run for this setup just to give you guys, you can see there we put, I think it was like 25 litres of fuel, and just ran it through to the end, just trying to keep it consistent. And you can see, you can have a little look at the lap times as we go over the line each time, just to show you how consistent we've got this setup. This isn't a qualifying all-out hot lap, where we're going to try and set the fastest lap possible. We're just trying to give you a setup that's consistent, that can drive nice, that's going to put you the lap times in without being too risky. There's always going to be moments with a car like this where the back end is going to try and step out on you because you're running such low downforce with this car, and obviously you only have hard tyres with this car. So you can see our best lap is at 150.994. First lap we do with the full fuel, we go over the line on 151.530. I spent quite a bit of time tuning the setup and getting some things, and then we restarted the practice sessions just so that the track wasn't rubbered in or anything. I didn't want to create a massively rubbered in track that's going to give you unrealistic lap time. So you can see now we're already up on our first base lap, which I always like to do. Like I say, I've said it in other videos, in a race situation, set yourself a good base lap to start with. Don't be pushing too hard, just try and keep it smooth, keep it steady, give yourself a target lap to aim for every lap then, and then you try and keep the lap time within a range of like 5 tenths to 6-7 tenths, something like that, of that lap, whether it goes 4 tenths faster, 4 tenths slower. It's always good just to give yourself a nice base first setup. So the first lap wasn't anything major pushing. So anyway, let's get on to stuff you can do in terms of setup. We'll go through the setup after, like I said, but main things you need to concentrate on when you're creating these setups for a very low downforce setup is the one main thing for this car, obviously, is the rake of the car. Now, you can't change dampers and stuff like that with this car, so you have to concentrate mainly on your rake of your car and your roll bars and stuff like that. So, if, for example, if you're going to a higher downforce track, you would want your front end pointed down to the ground and the rear end higher. And then you would stiffen your springs up and stiffen everything up, and make sure that that downforce is really pushing down. But you don't want the suspension soft at the rear then. You'd want a stiff suspension so that it's still gripping, because if it was just soft, the car would just push down too much with the downforce that would be put on the rear wing. It'd push down on that suspension, and you'd create a rake that wasn't pointing down forward for a setup that would require high downforce. But for a track like Monza, you want the opposite. Coming out of corners, you want the rear to dip, and you want the traction on the rear end. So what you need to do with this car is you need to kind of do it ride high, because you can't change stiffness and stuff like that with this car. It's very basic changes, but even with basic changes, you can still create a setup that's going to be faster for low downforce setup. So first thing I did with this setup was to find the ride height, and that basically means I wanted to run free wing. That's the wing I decided that I kind of wanted to run with this car to give myself some speed through these corners here and stability. I didn't want the car to be coming loose too much. It still has moments where if you push too hard, the back end might go a little bit loose, but you can see going through them two lesmos there, nice, clean and steady. And you can see our last lap was at 150.957. I think we actually matched our previous best lap there. You can see the consistency, and at the moment we're pretty much dead on the same lap. So you can see the consistency going into I think it's the Ascari chicane. You can see now it's really smooth. It's just nice over the curbs, and you can kind of see it on this video how the rake of the car is up at the front because we're running low downforce. So what we've done is we've raised the front ride height, and we've lowered the rear ride height. This creates more grip on the rear tyres. So coming out the corners you're going to have grip, but you need to be aware that this is going to lose you some grip on the front end. If you were running a GT3 car where you have more options with settings, you could compensate for this with the damper settings by running stiffer dampers, etc., and some really soft springs. For example, you'd go very low on your suspension springs to create grip, but then you'd stiffen your dampers up, and that would give you more reaction from the car. But at the moment this car seems to be handling very well. It's got the grip out the rear, and this car's got reasonably okay turning. It does suffer with a bit of understeer, but that's if you overdrive the car. So you can obviously cater for your lack of front grip with toe settings as well. We went pretty much neutral on our toe settings. Sometimes if you're going with a higher downforce setup, you might add a bit of positive toe to this car just to keep it nice and stuck to the ground. You could also go negative. It all depends on the track layout, but for this track I wanted to basically create as much speed as I physically could. So you're going to go as close to zero as you can, because zero toe is the best for straight line speed. It will also give you reasonably good handling in terms of your front end reactivity when you're steering. Also cambers. A track like this, the faster the track is, generally the rule would be to lower your camber angles. If you're on a high downforce track with a lot of corners, you're gonna erase them camber angles. But for this track, you're gonna go lower. And one thing you could do with another thing like this with a car that's rear engined and the weight's all on the rear, you're going to probably run slightly higher cambers on that rear tyre to the front. You can do that just to steady the rear through the corners, like this last corner now. It will just calm that rear down slightly. That's what I found when testing stuff out and tuning stuff. So bear that in mind when you're doing setups. If it's mid-engined, you're going to probably want the cambers to be very close to equal, maybe slightly more on the front end. But for this car, I think you can actually run them equal, dead on for a track like this. But I think possibly on this setup we might have gone slightly higher on the rear cambers over the front, or it's very close to being the same. We'll have a look when we get there. But in terms of, like I say, the toes, you've got to be careful when you're doing the tones like the rear. If you're going to have very neutral or minus front toes, you've got to be careful on the rear toes, because the more rear toe you have, the more support you're going to have on that rear end on acceleration zone. So it's going to keep it steadier in a straight line. The car is going to feel a bit more planted to the ground. It's not going to kick out so much, but it might create a bit of understeer. So just bear that in mind. I think for this we actually went to about 2 or 3 clicks on the rear toe just to steady the rear. If you went down to 0, it would be faster in a straight line, but then you're not going to have the stability for the corners, because it probably end up, because we've not got much downforce on, the car would end up sliding through the corners. So just bear that in mind when you're creating your setups. I want to try and give you some pointers to how I create my setups and what I do when I'm doing these setups. Obviously I'm starting very basic here. I'm going to try and do these videos more often and doing more in-depth ones in the future, but for a very basic car like this, it's quite a good car to get an idea of what changes to do in terms of basic stuff, because you can't do dampers, you can't go in depth on stuff. It's just very simple. Ride height, wing settings, toe, cambers, etc. On Assetto Corsa you will find that them changes you can gain a lot of time from with just them changes, because a lot of the other settings are actually, the default settings are actually quite nice. They're not too far off. it's normally just wing angle and stuff. And also brake bias, just be aware, for a track like this you may want to run slightly more front brake bias. That's just to stop the rear end kicking out in the braking zones, because you're going to be doing a lot of heavy braking, so you're not going to want the rear end to be kicking out. If you want, for example, if you're on a much faster track in terms of faster corners, not so much straights, it's mainly a lot of fast corners. Spa, for example, you would run a medium kind of downforce setting. You're gonna run a brake bias that's gonna be a little bit more towards the rear end, because you're gonna want, when you're braking, you're gonna want that rear end to start just not kicking out, but you're gonna want it to turn in slightly rather than keeping really steady. For a track like Monza, the main braking zones are turn 1 going into the first chicane, then turn 2 going into the next chicane, and you really want the stability for them corners. The braking zone for this corner up here, for example, isn't massively, you're only going down to like 4th and 3rd gear briefly. It's not a massive braking zone, and also the last corner you're still carrying a lot of speed through these corners. You can possibly change your brake bias. One thing you need to be careful of going into this last corner is if you go more rearwards, it tends to unstabilize the car a lot. I tended to keep it the same for this corner, because you're braking quite late into that 100 and you're going very tight into this corner. I like to keep the line nice and tight, but then you want to get on the power as early as you can. If you start kicking that rear end out a little bit too much and you're getting on the power, you'll find yourself going into a drift and you're more than likely going to slide. So that's why at Monza you're going to run more front brake bias, because it's just going to keep the car more steady. It's going to stop the car probably a bit faster than if you went rear brake bias, because it's going to be unstable, it's not going to be gripping properly. You can see how stable the car is in the braking zones right now. I think we had the ABS setting, possibly, can't 100% remember, but it might be on around 4 or 5, I think. That's just so, because we've obviously got a lot of front brake bias, I tend to find that if you take the ABS off slightly, so not on its strongest setting, so if you take a bit off, you do get a bit more turning on the corners and a bit more ability to turn, so it kind of compensates for that very slightly. You can see now how well the setup's produced. Lap after lap has been very consistent. Our previous lap of 151.155, only 2/10 off our best lap. At this point in this lap, we're pretty much even with the lap. You can see we're actually above, going slightly faster than our previous best. And for this car to be hitting these laps consistently, we're not in the most optimum conditions in terms of lap time. You can see we got the sun out, the track's not in its most rubbered in. It's not like clouded over, and it's not cold temperatures. So when you think about what you can see there, even if the back end did go, I noticed that that was the one time the back end did go, the setup was able to easily catch it because of the rate we were running. So just bear that in mind. If you're going to run overcast conditions, lower temperatures, you'll probably be able to go a fair bit faster, especially when running your lowest fuel setting and just going for that 1 lap qualifying lap or 2 lap qualifying lap. So we're going to go over the line on this lap now. See what is free with that little moment on that chicane. Lost us a bit of time, but still only 3/10 off our best lap so far on this run. And we're going through, I think this is possibly going to be our last run of the lap. So you can see we're braking just before the 150. We braked a little bit late there, but we managed to stop the car and get it turned in and get on the power reasonably okay. About a 10th down on our ultimate time at this point. And then we're going to go through a little track guide now anyway. So looking again, we're going to brake just before what we would do with the GT3 car. So obviously this car's not got the as much grip with this hard tyre, so you're going to brake just before the bridge. You see there, brake a little bit early, down into 2nd gear, skim the apex of the curb, skim that apex of the curb, hard on the power, try not to run over the curb too much. If you get that left tyre on that curb, you're going to start bouncing up and down and lose traction. Down into 3rd gear for the first part of the lesson, on the power as early as you can. We missed the apex slightly there, got onto the left side, but we didn't lose too much time. Down into 3rd gear just before the 50, hard on the power, the over the exit. Use some of the now this is that point there, you can use some of that Asseto on the left there. If you use that, you can gain a bit of time by getting on the power that little fraction earlier, and you'll gain it down the straight. So looking for our next braking zone, we're going to brake just before the bridge here now, going down into 4th gear, then 3rd gear, and use some of the curb on the left if you can. We ran a little bit wide into that corner, and then over this curb slightly if you need to, hard on the power. If you can do that corner perfectly, you will actually avoid the curbs on either side. You will literally skim each part of the apex, and you'll find you actually gain a bit of extra speed because you're not bouncing. When you hit the curves with this car, you do find that it bounces quite a lot and you will lose a bit of traction. So going through the final corner, hard on the power as early as you can, and we're going to go over the line for I think it's going to be about 150.4 or 5 or something like that. So it's not our best lap, it's close to our first lap, but you know, this is just to give you an idea of what the car can do. And you can see there, we've left that now, and we're going to go through the setup and have a look at the actual changes that we did for this setup and to create the setup for a low downforce setup. So this could work on other tracks where you want really low downforce. So you see brake bias on 66. Like I say, if you're at a track like Spa, you may want to go down to 63 or 64 just to create a bit more of rear coming into the corner and rotating a bit more. You want more rotation on the car on some tracks, especially if you've got a very tight hairpin. You're going to want more rotation on the car. But for Monza, I found 66 very nice. You can see there the aero, we went down to 3. Now, I don't know how much more downforce would actually benefit you. I didn't really try it. I just wanted to create a setup that would work for running low downforce. You know, it's going to be very hard to overtake a car running low downforce at Monza. So suspension, main things you can change. You see what we did with the tyres also, creating more grip to the rear end by running lower pressures on the rear, higher on the front. This is just going to give the rear a little bit more stability in the corners. And you can see on the canvas there, we actually went by 4 clicks higher camber on the rear, which gives the rear more grip compared to the front going through them corners. Toe, you can see there, we're actually on 20. I don't know, to me I don't know exactly how they work the cambers in this game, because 0 must be minus because it would go to minus. So we ran at 20 quite low and 25 on the rear, just a bit more support on the rear. Ride height, like I say before, we've raised the ride height on the front. You can see there 10 and 4 on the rear, creating that rake that you want on a track like Monza. So your grip, when the weight transfers on accelerating, is going to go to the rear tyres rather than pointing forwards. So you're going to get more grip on the front end. And again, anti-roll bars maximum on the front and minimum on the rear. That's to create more stability over the curbs and more traction to the rear end. That's basic changes that you can do to a setup to run very low downforce. Just a few tips that I wanted to give you guys for what I do in terms of creating setups. It might not be the exact way to do it, the perfect way to do it, but that's how I go about creating low downforce setups. And I think you can see that if you watch that video there, you can see it definitely seems to work, and it may benefit you. I just wanted to give you some more pointers and just some more information about how and why and what I do, and tips to create a setup if you want to run low downforce. Anyway guys, I hope this video has helped you out slightly. If there's anything you want to know, make sure you leave it in the comment section. Anything that you want to say, just put it in the comment section. Make sure you sub this channel if you haven't already. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. I do appreciate everyone that gives a thumbs up video. You know, it gives me more motivation to do videos. Every time I see them clicks going up on the thumbs up, I get more motivation to do these videos. So again, thank you very much, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Thanks again for watching.
taking over.